never heard his cadence. How you calling the play? What your cadence and what your rhythm is. How does that happen? How does a quarterback on the National Football League level, who was a QB2, meaning the backup, for weeks, and never, ever, ever once hear or get the opportunity to do anything with any of the starters? Even if you're not a starter and you're a reserve and the QB1, the starter, is getting all the reps. Let's say, for example, there's 20 reps in practice. I was told the Bill Parcells, the Jimmy Johnsons of the world, and others would call for extra reps during practice just to make sure the backup was prepared in the event that they will have to enter the game. How is not that done? How is that not done for Shadeur Sanders? Just got here, and you know that the person ahead of him is an undersized rookie trying to get the ball out of his hands every single play inside of 2 seconds just so he don't get himself hurt. How does the backup to that guy not get any reps? I don't care what anybody says. That's highly suspicious. Now, we've heard Kevin Stefanski, the offensive coordinator as well, aren't necessarily high on Shadeur Sanders, whereas the GM, Andrew Berry, and maybe the owner Haslam might feel a little bit differently. So the Cleveland Browns are clearly a house divided. When he was at Colorado, completes 70% of his passes, throwing about 37 touchdowns, guiding them to a winning record, being coached by his daddy, primetime Deion Sanders. Along the way, there was a lot of resentment built. I'm making the case, ladies and gentlemen, that was Shadeur Sanders drafted as a 5th rounder because he was a 5th round talent, or was he drafted as a 5th rounder because folks wanted to send a message that they weren't that high on him or the prospects of him and his daddy making noise? And not only that, there were people that were saying that his attitude leading up to the NFL draft in those pre-draft interviews were not the greatest. Why? Because guess what? He was letting you know what he would and wouldn't do. And he always has questions because he's smart. And a simpler way to put it with Shadeur Sanders is that it's all about the why. With him, the knock against him, if you speak to NFL teams, is that he is not somebody that's just going to do whatever somebody just tells him to do without at least asking questions. And right now is the time to ask ourselves questions about Kevin Stefanski. Kevin Stefanski arrived in 2020. Coach of the year in 2020, 2023. Kevin Stefanski, Shadeur Sanders this Sunday is going to be Kevin Stefanski's 13th quarterback. At some point in time, ain't that about you? At least a little bit. Just a little bit. You did have Baker Mayfield there. You did have Joe Flacco there. You did have Jacoby Brissett there. You did have Jameis Winston there. You've had an abundance of quarterbacks. Deshaun Watson. The thing is, 13 quarterbacks and still looking for one. 5 years later, at some point in time, when do we get to look at you and just ask the question, what level of culpability do you have? It's in his 13th quarterback in 5 years. And most of those changes had nothing to do with injury. Ain't that about the coach at some point?